Alright, so we're back for some more puzzles. We did miss a puzzle yesterday, so we're going to stay in the same rating range. Again, all themes. Let's see how today goes. Alright, puzzle number 1. So what's happening here? I think there's clearly some exposed king for both players, but maybe especially for white. We have some pieces floating around that king, which is nice. Notably, our knight is hanging. There's some tension between the bishops. We would like to give checkmate, but the knight guards that square. And I don't see any immediate checks with our queen, because those squares are all covered by a variety of white pieces. Also notably, there's this knight takes c2 idea, which is currently guarded by the queen. If the queen didn't guard on c2, then it would force king to come to d2. And even in that event, I don't see what black's strong follow-up is. But it is something to keep in mind. So, what are the moves that we have available to us? Well, one possible move that I see is bishop b4, because it pins this knight and immediately threatens checkmate. The only problem, though, is that after a move like bishop b4, I have to be ready to meet rook takes d4. I already stated that the knight is hanging there. And in that event, I still have no checks. I could take on c3 with my bishop. But even if pawn takes and then queen takes, the rook seems to be able to come back. So that's not good enough. Another thing to note is that if I move my queen, we might have knight to f3. Which could be a clever idea. But since my move has to address the problem of the hanging knight, and I don't have a check with my queen, that might be hard to accomplish. So what other ideas do I have? What if I just simply took the bishop and said, let me just grab this. What would white do? White would then have the option of taking the knight or taking the bishop. Let's just say simply that white takes the bishop. What did I achieve by exchanging those moves? Well, then the queen is no longer guarding c2, so I would really get this knight takes c2 move. And king d2, and like I said before, I would need a follow-up. I think whatever black does has to be pretty urgent, because as I forgot to mention, when we count pieces at the beginning, we're down a full rook, so we're pretty much compelled to checkmate here, or to win heavy material. So after something like this, and queen takes, then knight takes c2 and king here. I think we're starting to run out of steam. The knight is attacked. White's queen is going to come to the defense. Turns out I overlooked something very simple, though. I just now realized that there is this, we talked about this theme of if the queen moves, knight comes to f3. Well, when the knight comes to f3, it guards both of these squares. So we're just needing to make sure that this square is taken away from from white's king. So all the themes come together with a very serious urgent move, queen e2. I'm actually a bit embarrassed that it took me that long to notice such a forcing move. Queen e2, knight is the only move, and this is actually checkmate. So a bit slow on the uptake there, but we got there in the end. So that's why it's valuable to look at all the possible checks and forcing moves, even if they seem a bit ridiculous. In my process of looking for the forcing moves, I completely glazed over that possibility. But using some of the themes that I already established, I was able to come up with the idea independently of looking for forcing moves. So let's try to be a bit better about the forcing moves this go around. Alright, if I were playing a blitz game, I might take here without thinking. So why are we not taking there? One thing to note is that we are currently down the exchange, potentially. We have 4 pieces and a rook, and black has 3 pieces and 2 rooks. So if we take here, maybe we equalize material a little. Another thing to note is, why are we not taking this rook? For instance, if we take the rook, we're then up a piece. And the only thing that I see for black is to trap our queen. And then we just need to find a way to extract our queen. I don't think that the solution would then be to take the rook, because if the bishop was compelled to take and we could get this knight as well, then maybe we'd still be up material. But after here, queen takes rook, there is king takes. The knight remains guarded, and at that point we have a piece and a rook for a queen. That's really unclear. However, I do see that after it takes the rook, bishop here, we do have this move, bishop e3. I found this move because when I see this position, I immediately think about removing the defender of the bishop, or making some extra squares for my queen. And I can do so by attacking the similarly valued piece, which is black's queen. So when I consider this queen trap, I think about the moves that attack black's queen as well, maybe trying to move black's queen so I can step up. And that move is bishop e3. Because if then they take our queen, then we'll take black's queen, and we're still up that extra piece. Also important to note is that in this calculation, we have to know what happens after queen takes bishop, but in that case, black has undefended their bishop on b7, and we just take that. So it really does look like our queen can jump in here and get away with it. If black were to try some other way of trapping our queen, maybe knight here, looks like we can just take that. So with all of that in mind, we just need to see the move bishop e3, and then when the queen steps away, we can bring our queen out. Nice, a 2500 rated puzzle. So that feels good. Alright. In my experience in these kinds of endgames, there's one of 2 things is going to happen. Either, we notice the serious material imbalance. Either we are going to checkmate black, or we are going to somehow fork the king and queen. Notice that forking the king and queen is not immediately possible because the queen isn't on the forking square. However, it is possible that we can either force the queen to move. Sometimes we'll have some sort of forcing move that forces the queen to move, and then this will become possible. Doesn't seem like that's happening here because the queen might be able to step out with check. Important to note too is that when we give check to the king is going to move to take this pawn. So, honestly, one of the best things to start doing here is start to calculate some forcing sequences with checks and whatnot and see where it brings the king. For instance, if we can force the king to take the knight, then we're winning the queen, right? So let's consider this check first. King is forced to take this pawn. The knight covers these two squares, the bishop covers these squares, the pawn covers this square, and our king covers all the other squares. So after here, again, we've just noticed that we don't really mind if our knight gets taken by his king. So can we force black to take that knight? Can we give check to the king? There's a check here, but then black just takes that. So that's no good. So there is also a check here, which is pretty forcing. Again, black can't take this knight. So black will have to step back this way, which is the only available square. And if that happens, we need to have a follow-up. There's no knight check from that position. What else? I mean, there is a pawn check, and the king takes the pawn. I'm also considering the possibility that we somehow get the bishop here and the knight here, and then have a discovered check to win the queen. Here. Also notably, when our knight comes here, black loses their check. There's no check for black, which means that if we can threaten checkmate, that's also very strong. So after knight f6, king takes. What about this move c3? c3 comes to mind because it prepares bishop here, which is a mate. And covers this square, so it means that this might force black to take. But black is really almost out of options because if queen takes, then we can still go bishop here. It's not mate, but we're winning the queen. Again, if king takes, then we still have bishop here. So after here, c3, black's king can't move. Black's queen coming to stop the mate somehow isn't good enough. Either we can just take the queen, or even if it could guard this square, which it doesn't look like it could, we could play here anyways and then trade for the queen that way. So after here, the last move to consider before we play it is pawn to d5. But again, because we covered this square with our pawn, we can give check, and then it covers this square, this escape square. The king has to take, and then we win the queen. So this is just winning after c3. Check, and then get the queen. Moving on. Okay, there's some pretty obvious theme of weak king. And it looks like this is just checkmate, right? So if we calculate queen h8, king comes here, pawn forward, king comes here, queen comes back, isn't that mate? It looks like it's just mate in 3. I kind of glossed over the calculation here, but essentially, very exposed king, like it's clear that we're coming in. We have two options for entry, But this option cuts off the back rank, so it forces the king forward. If we go here, maybe there's king here. And then to make progress, we have to come here anyways. So queen here, king here. And at that point, this is a very forcing move. This pawn cuts us off, king has to take. But then when we come here, I notice that the queen covers everything. So I'm really shocked that that's, not like an 1800 puzzle, to be frank. It's it's a one-way street with the most obvious moves. The only check moves besides, queen h7, but that's a one-move calculation. So far so good. We're doing good today. If we get this puzzle as well, then I'll change the rating range for the next one. Or maybe change the format of how we're doing these puzzles. So what's going on here? Slightly exposed king. We have some entry with our pieces. It seems black is down a piece, so we should probably make something happen. We have this knight for 2 bishops. We can take potentially on f2, which could be nice because it actually threatens to bring the queen into h3. And then maybe this isn't mate though, because the bishop actually guards that square. So let's look at the check first. Well, okay. Rather, let's just categorize our candidate moves. So this is a candidate move. This is a candidate move. Rook h6 is a potential candidate move. I noticed that if the bishop were to take, there's either king comes here and it's mate, or king comes here and it's mate. So the bishop can't take, which means that this is a forcing move because we're threatening to come in here somehow. But it doesn't seem that strong, because even there, in our ideal scenario, the king can kind of escape. It's just food for thought. So the most enticing candidate move is queen f3. If it's not some knight sacrifice or queen f3, then we can come back and look for more candidate moves. Maybe things that we overlooked. So after queen f3, we do have this idea of rook h6, so we know that if the king were to step over to the h file somehow, well, first of all, the king can't come here. But after rook h6 check, if the king were to come back, then we could just deliver mate somehow with the queen or rook. So, but if bishop takes, we're going to take here. Well, if the king is on h2, we'll take here. And it's that same scenario as before. If the king comes to the corner, we have a mate. And if the king comes to h3, we have a mate. So let's look then at here and here. In that event, after rook h6 and bishop takes h6, maybe we have knight f2. If king steps up, this is mate by the queen. So king will step here. And then knight here. Check. King has to come back, because if it steps to g1, we're going to give a mate in 2. But I'm having a hard time seeing the checkmate there. So that means that after king h3, we might need a different move. So what could that different move be? Queen h5 doesn't look like it's doing it because the king steps back. We didn't gain anything by having our queen on h5. king h3. Oh, maybe there we could start with knight f2. The idea being that if bishop takes, then we have rook h6, which is mate. So here, king h5, knight f2. If king steps back, then we probably have queen h5. And no matter where the king steps, no, if the king steps here, then we would have check and the king steps here, but we don't have mate because of this bishop. I am struggling just a little to find the checkmate after king h5. Sorry, king h3. I've been saying h5 a lot, haven't I? King h3. But there should be a checkmate here. It's so many pieces around the king. Well, honestly, at that point, we could potentially just play a move like g5. And black is getting kind of destroyed. White has pretty much no forcing move. And we're going to play rook h6 as a follow-up. You know, even if takes, then we take. Okay, white gives like one spite check. We step up. So I'm overthinking it. I think if he steps to h3, we can just play g5 at the least. And we're going to give some sort of side rank mate. So really after queen h3, we've eliminated this as an option. And we've eliminated this as an option. No, sorry, we've eliminated this as an option because of this check. But is it not the same if the king comes here? After rook h6, it's still a mate threat, and a very powerful one too. Pretty much forcing white to take that. But then it's the same scenario where we take and then checkmate. I think queen f3. Yeah, so here we just play rook h6. This is exactly the same. Alright, so we got all 5 right. I think it would have been more interesting in this last puzzle to see king h3. But maybe that's kind of neglecting the theme of the puzzle, which is rook h6. I am curious though to see seems like the computer actually likes king h3 the best. So I was planning on playing g5 because I didn't see the win after knight takes f2. It seems that g5 is an alternative mate. Because even with these spite checks, I could even take with the king. I was planning on taking with this rook, which seems to be one shorter for mate. Because white gives up everything to pin the rook. That's kind of funny. So I'm happy that my planned move was good enough. I am curious though. King h3, knight f2. Right, king h2, knight g4, king h3. Oh, you can take on e3. Alright, that's something that I missed entirely. But yeah, it was clear that it was going to be, like, you can't see this position and not think, oh, there's a checkmate here somewhere. This is just overwhelming. So that was my thought process for these puzzles today. Some are more straightforward than others, but all these were pretty forcing, with strong candidate moves and strong mating ideas. I think the big thing to notice here is that a forcing move can be a threat in addition to being an actual check or capture. Like this rook h6 move is a perfect idea of a forcing move, because if white were to do anything but take that rook, then rook h1 would be checkmate. So hopefully that was instructive, and we'll consider doing either a different rating range or a different theme of puzzles in the future.